last Concola. Look, Minister, I couldn't agree more with the last speaker that this legislation should be parked and leave it for another government, if at all. At the outset, I too, and all right-thinking people are opposed, fundamentally opposed to any hate speech, any hatred or divisions or people being portrayed and being attacked and being undermined because of their religion or race or colour or creed or whatever. But, Minister, this bill is a shambles. And it seems to be a vanity project of yours. And it's very interesting now to see this evening. When this bill came in here, second stage, I could be corrected in this, but I think it was only Deputy Toby and Mayor Féin that opposed it. I remember Sinn Féin welcoming it. The 4 or 5 speakers that spoke welcomed it, and all sides of the House welcomed it. It's amazing how, I don't know, people can change. And of course, everybody's entitled to change. It's a bad day we don't learn something and listen and appreciate change. But fundamentally, and I'm not going to repeat, but I do salute Senator Shannon O'Shan Cogan for reading the 72 definitions that you want to have of gender into the record and all that. And I won't bore the House with that, but it's nonsense, and it's patent nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And patent nonsense, and nothing short of it. And you have a half-baked bill coming out, which is worse. You've withdrawn some elements of it, and you have even left out, like you're going to have, as Deputy Howland said, this legislation, if it's passed, going concurrent with the 1989 Act. And confusion all around. And you mentioned in your speech there that the bill, the duty of any government is to protect the citizens of the state. Well, my God, what a statement from a lame duck Minister for Justice, that nobody is safe in their homes. And I heard this morning a report in Morning Ireland where all the shopkeepers in Dublin crying out for protection, that the staff are terrified. And if they do apprehend somebody kind of crime in their shop, they're waiting 15, 20 minutes in the city of Dublin, in the main thoroughfare, capital city, for a Garda to arrive, because the Garda aren't there. Garda aren't there, full stop. And the total trust in the Garda has been in its under your watch, because they've been pulled from all over the country up to deal with the situation in Dublin, and we're left without any Garda. We never saw anything like the lack of Gardaí that we're suffering in our rural areas, in our towns and villages. It's unbelievable, it beggars belief. And this is the kind of nonsense that you want to come in with here, into this House here again tonight. And I'm glad to see that people have concerns about it and have issues, because, as I said, it got a fear fault when it came in, when it introduced the second stage. And as I said, the bill, I mean, the whole subjective nature of the bill, where dúirt ban lum go dúirt ban leahy, or dúirt fear lum go dúirt fear leahy. You said that, you know, something that might be construed as hate speech. It's very dangerous territory, and it's totally subjective. And unlike most legislation, a person, any of us, or any other, is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Here, it was a total. Somebody can make a complaint that somebody else, they heard them saying a hate crime, or what they thought was a hate crime, and it was up to the Garda sergeant to bring a conviction on that basis without any evidence. And indeed, we had the case here. It was debated at second stage, where 2 people could be involved in a fracas in a public place. And they mightn't be summoned at all for the fracas injured, but they might be surprised. They could be summons if one had muttered a so-called hate crime to the other. It's just nonsense, to me anyway, total patent nonsense, and that's nothing short of it. And it must be, as I said, withdrawn as far as I'm concerned and left. You did also say that you took out parts of it and you were going to leave it to the next government, whatever shape that might be. So hopefully it won't be you as Minister for Justice, and nothing personally, but I'm just saying for your manner of supporting the Gardaí, and the manner of the Garda Commissioner not having the faith of the Gardaí. It's a serious situation. The 98.9% don't have faith in their boss, and you have the faith in him, and you have said how safe Dublin streets are. Very few streets in any towns are safe. And you can walk down, flanked by seeing a Gardaí down the city of Dublin, saying how safe it is. And we see what the retailers and other people do. And the Taoiseach in his famous report, where aspiration of what you're going to do to make Dublin safe, you don't have the numbers, and the numbers don't have the confidence in their leader, and let alone to have it in yourself. I think you refuse to go to one of the conferences even. So, as I said, the search warrants in the section, like, it's wide sweeping powers to Garda Síochána. Remember, I'm a supporter of Garda Síochána all my life, and I want more support for them. And indeed, I have in this house and other areas condemned out of hand attacks on Garda Síochána. Our own very wonderful guard, local guard, Garda John Watch, was still out, serious injuries for being attacked. Garda Philly Ryan, likewise, in the next area to me, out attacking. That is reprehensible in the extreme, and it's shocking that they're on their own and they don't have backup for anybody to try and help them. But this whole situation is just, as I said, a cobbled up piece of legislation now. A last-ditch effort by yourself to kind of save face and have this introduced here. And as I said, there are people out there, the whole situation regarding to AI, and that could be used to actually imitate a person's voice. And that voice could be, this is not my words now, these are words of very eminent professors and other people. It could be used and recorded, and a fake voice of a citizen or anybody else, a politician or anybody else. And that could be used in to be deemed a hate offence. It certainly could well be. And in that case, a citizen will be dependent on his laptop or his records and computer or whatever to make sure it was nothing to do with him, but this is how farcical and how dangerous it is. And with the evolution of AI and what's going on and what they can do, and we've seen it all over the world. So, as I said, Tim Morehouse, the Director of Artificial Intelligence and Automation at Ernst & Young of Ireland, is quoted by the Times. While deep fakes have long been considered just to be fake video material, it is important to realise that this is now also spreading to both voice and text-based media. That's what I'm talking about. While in the early days, deep fakes mostly damaged people's reputation, which is serious enough, globally they are now used to impersonate people to commit crimes such as financial fraud, and examples of people calling parents with imitations of their children's voices to ask for money or to have, for example, being observed. That's what's happening and can happen. So this legislation should be totally taken back, leave it to a more considered time, and the fact that we've only limited amount of time here for tonight again. Why the rush? Rush legislation is often or nearly always bad legislation, and a person, your desire to have it under your belt, so to say, as you've got this passed, I don't think you'll get any kudos from any source for it. And DCU Professor of Computing, Alan Smeaton, who is also a member of the government's AI Advisory Council, is also quoted. And he said, and I quote, text scams and phone scams only started a few years ago. They are now part of society and part of what it is like to live in 2024. And the same will apply to deepfakes. You need to have your wits about you. As artificial intelligence technology has become more powerful, it's also become easier to use. The latest version of DAF.ie is built into ChatGPT and Bing, while Google is offering its own tools to free to users. So this is a whole area that's open to widespread abuse and misinterpretation and abuse. And there's no mention of it in your legislation. So your statement rings very hollow that the government's duty is to protect its citizens. You failed utterly in that, and you're pushing through this legislation here to try and tie people up in knots and try and intimidate ordinary citizens from having their voice heard. You don't like the voice of the people. Your government has been the most anti-people, ordinary people that I've ever seen here in my term with 4 governments. And I don't know why you've such a dislike to them. And the games you're playing with them and the legislation you're passed is not a cowra leis na dina. It's not helping the people. It's on the time becoming more aggressive. But this, pardon the saying, beats Banagher out completely. And I and my colleagues in the rural independents are totally opposed to it.
So thank you to deputies for their comments and their views. I suppose, Deputy, you asked what is the point and why are we here? We're here because I fundamentally believe that we need to have hate crime legislation on our statute, and we don't. And I've said it at the outset, and it's not that I've been forced or pushed into a particular route, but I believe that we had a consensus very clearly in this House. There was a very strong consensus for the previous legislation. We lost that consensus, and I believe that instead of not enacting any element of it, I wanted to ensure that hate crime was for the first time put on statute here. We're the last country across Europe to have it or to not have it, and I absolutely believe that we need to have it. So we're here to make sure that we have for the first time on our statute books hate crime legislation, but I do believe that we need to do more to update and to amend and to improve the 89 Act. The 89 Act will still exist, it is still there, we will still have incitement legislation, and many of the points that people have raised here and indeed in the Seanad in the debate last summer, where people thought it would be the end of the world, they were talking about elements that have been in law since 1989. So yes, I absolutely accept there are different ways that this could have been done, but I fundamentally believe that we need to have hate crime legislation on our statute books, and that's why we're here this evening, that's why I'm progressing this, and that's why I hope at a later stage we will be able to address the elements of the incitement to hatred and violence elements that were taken out. To speak directly to Deputy Howland's point and to the question around the technicalities of it, fundamentally, the point here is that I believe we need to keep the incitement to hatred and violence element together and to progress it together at a later stage, and obviously that will be in the next all. But the technical element of how the amendment is drafted, so the proposal relates to the definition of hatred as currently drafted in the bill, and this is hatred, which means hatred against a person or a group of persons in the state or elsewhere on account of their protected characteristics or any one of these characteristics. However, because the term protected characteristics does not appear in the 89 Act, applying this definition to hatred to the constructed term that's in the Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred Act of 89 would not have the legal effect without also defining the protected characteristics themselves. So except it is a technical element to it, but the overall basis here is that I genuinely believe that we need to progress that piece together and as a whole, and I don't like the fact that we might have two separate definitions or characteristics for both pieces of legislation, but that's why I think that we need to make sure that for the next government and for the next all that we have a structure in place to make sure that we can update the legislation. Deputy Daly referred to recklessness. Again, this was included in the incitement to hatred provisions, which have already been removed, and I think in general there were broad support for them anyway as they passed through the bill. Deputy Barry spoke about the demonstration test and people who are demonstrating in general. I mean, it's really important to point out here, we're talking about where a crime has already been committed. So if somebody's at a protest for whatever reason, if they're not protesting peacefully and if they're committing a crime, they're already committing a crime. We're talking about making sure where there's an aggravating factor of hate, that is taken into consideration as well. There was discussion about possession of material. Again, that's something that's already in the 89 Act. That's something in law. Just to maybe speak to some of the two areas that people have referenced quite significantly, and that is around the definitions, the definition of hatred and gender. And maybe to note, Deputy Carsey did not put in any amendments in relation to either of these. Firstly, and I outlined this to the Seanad, but it's important to outline it here again. One of the key criticisms is that hatred has not been defined in this bill. And I want to explain to the House why this is the case. When drafting new legislation, a comparative exercise is undertaken to examine how other jurisdictions have legislated for a particular topic. This exercise was undertaken in developing this bill at great length. I would add, given that we are one of the last countries in the Western world to provide for hate crime laws, as I've mentioned. There's therefore a great body of comparative legislation available worldwide, and I can say that no other jurisdictions have defined hatred. Similar legislation from many different jurisdictions around the world have been examined, and hatred is not defined in any of them. Some jurisdictions use synonyms for hatred such as hostility or ill will or malice, such as is the case in England and Scotland, but again these terms are not defined. In addition, the framework decision of 2008 on combating racism and xenophobia that Ireland is required to transpose, that I referred to earlier on, does not define hatred. It states that hatred should be understood as referring to hatred based on race, colour, religion, descent, or national or ethnic origin. And again, a suggestion that we use the definition of gender in the Equal Status Act. There's no definition of gender in the Equal Status Act. This is exactly in line with the approach that we are taking in this bill. The definitions of hatred proposed by many deputies and indeed by senators previously are based on hatred which is used for policy and advocacy purposes through the ECRI. It's not intended for legislation. And just to be clear, my officials and I expressly contacted the ECRI, who confirmed that it was never intended for inclusion in criminal legislation. On the contrary, they've made it very clear that this definition is only intended to inform policy and to offer guidance. I've been strongly advised also by the Attorney-General against the use of the ECRI definition on the basis that attaching different words to the definition with the aim of explaining hatred would then require an explanation for each of these constituent words. So we have the Deputy across, Deputy Carthy, saying that we need simple and clear definitions. What they are proposing are the terms opprobrium, enmity or detestation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, these are not commonly understood concepts in the same way that hatred is. They do not provide any additional precision. They could leave the legislation vulnerable to constitutional challenge on the basis that the offences become excessively broad, vague, uncertain and inconsistent with the rule of law. They're certainly not words, most of them, that I would use on a daily basis. The Attorney-General also advised that it's not possible or appropriate to provide exhaustive definitions of every term in the legislation. Additionally, if these type of amendments were accepted, each one of the proposed terms would have to be proven beyond reasonable doubt in order for a court to secure a conviction. This would mean that on top of providing that the person committed the offence, the DPP would have to prove that the individual concerned demonstrated opprobrium, enmity or detestation, was biased, prejudiced, held contempt, was hostile and was a bigot. This would place an almost impossible burden on the prosecution. We want to make sure that we're enacting legislation that can actually be workable. In essence, I believe that for the purpose of this legislation, many of the terms proposed to define hatred are simply more obscure words which are more likely to confuse a jury in the course of a criminal prosecution than the widely understood term of hatred. This is a view that's also shared by the Office of the DPP. The definition of hatred as currently set out in the bill represents the words ordinary and everyday meaning, and I think we can all understand what it means. The person who attacks a person leaving a gay club for no other reason other than they hate gay people can be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and labelled the hate criminal that they are. The person who attacks a person simply because of the colour of their skin and clearly demonstrates that can be labelled the hate criminal that they are. There will be no legal uncertainty as to what constitutes a hate offence, as hatred will have its ordinary and everyday meaning, and this reflects the rules of statutory interpretation which the Supreme Court has also consistently upheld, and it's for those reasons that we have not changed it, because I believe this is the correct approach. Separately, in terms of the definition of gender, again something that really I believe so many people are missing the point of here. This is not about somebody's legal definition. If somebody's being attacked, they're not being asked, well, do you have a gender cert? They're not being asked, well, is this your gender? What is your gender? They're being attacked because of who they are. And I think people are missing the point here. It does not affect the Gender Recognition Act, just to say that clearly, the Civil Registration Act or any other acts on the statute book. And I want to be very clear and ensure that everyone understands this. The definition of gender provided for in this bill is for the specific purposes of this bill, and that is again to protect our citizens from hate crime. And we can have different definitions. We have legislation previously where we have 3 different definitions for children in the one piece of legislation. So it's not to say that this immediately impacts on others. We know in particular that members of our LGBTQI communities experience disproportionate levels of harassment, abuse and violence. We know that members are targeted for the way they look, for the way they dress, the way they identify, and of course the people that they love. We know that it is precisely the people who do not fit into conventional ideas of gender and sexuality who are most vulnerable to this kind of victimisation. This legislation is vital and it is long overdue. Our statistics on hate crime and hate-related incidents have risen year on year across Europe. Harassment and violence against LGBTQI people is increasing, and the Council of Europe has noted a marked increase in hate speech and hate crime targeting people and organisations based on sexual orientation, on gender identity and sex characteristics. This has also been documented by the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency. Prejudice in 2024, a survey of more than 100,000 LGBTQI people across Europe provides a snapshot of the scale of discrimination, bullying, harassment and violence that members of this community face. More than half of surveyed respondents were victims of hate-motivated harassment. Ireland is no different. Over half of the respondents in the EU survey say that prejudice and intolerance in Ireland has increased, while 2 in 3 say that violence in Ireland has increased. In the year before the EU survey, more than half of those surveyed had been harassed, 1 in 20 had been attacked. These numbers illustrate the scale of the problem, but they do not adequately convey the impact of these incidents on the victims themselves and on the broader LGBTQI community. They send a message to these people that they are unsafe simply because of who they are. This is not about their legal status, this is about who they are as people. The psychological impact of hate crime is much deeper than regular crime as well. Hate crimes dehumanise people. It goes to the heart of a person's identity. It damages their dignity and it forces people to change their behaviours and hide who they are. This is not a vanity project. This is people's lives that we're talking about here. The objective of the legislation is to provide protection to victims of hate crime on the basis of personal identity characteristics. These include gender, sex characteristics and sexual orientation. And the approach that we've taken here, it's deliberately inclusive to ensure that we are adequately capturing the individuals and the communities that we know are targeted by these crimes. Inclusion, if this broader meaning, was on foot of recommendations from the civil society organisations, but in particular those who are representing vulnerable and minority groups. The broad definition of gender ensures protection for transgender persons as well as for non-binary persons and other people who do not identify with any of the terms expressly included in the legislation. And I think it's important, if I could, just to outline a couple of cases that we're talking about here, because we're not talking about it in the abstract, we're talking about very real people. This is the Anti-Gender and Anti-Sexual Orientation Crime Report from An Garda Síochána. And just to outline some of the cases here, firstly, we have a robbery from an individual. The injured party was with a group of friends when a group of 3 to 5 individuals began intimidating the person in question. This is a transgender person. The person attempted to evade these individuals, was pursued, was punched 3 times to the face and pushed to the ground. Their runners and hoodie were taken. At least 2 youths, 1 male and 1 female, were involved. Once Gardaí arrived, the person in question had a cut lip, loose lower front teeth, visible grazes to the left arm. This was hate crime. This was motivated by a person's hatred because they were anti-transgender. They didn't single out any other individual in the group, just the person that was transgender. A second to outline. A female was on the way to the market with 2 friends and was attacked by a man physically who threw his body at her with all of his strength. The person asked him what was he doing. He said that she was nothing more than a man. Again, he repeated several times, saying she was nothing more than a trans. These are real incidents. These are real people. These are people who are being targeted simply because of who they are. This is not a discussion about gender or somebody's legal status. These are facts. These are people who are already impacted by hate crimes. And what we are simply doing by this legislation, and it's not just about gender, it's about individuals who are being attacked and targeted because of the colour of their skin, because of the fact that they might have a disability, because of the fact that they come from a different country to where we've been born. There are many reasons as to why people are being targeted. We know that it has a greater impact on a person. We know that targeting somebody simply because of who they are as a person has a greater impact on them. That is why this law is being passed. And I think it's really important to be clear here, because there's either intentional or otherwise objective here to try and misconstrue that we're still changing the hate speech legislation. Let me be very clear for anybody's social media or clips that they want to put out. We're not amending the 89 Act. I've been very clear that that's been progressed at a later stage. We are talking about hate crime. We are making sure that where a crime has already been committed, where it's motivated by hatred of a particular person and their characteristics, who they are as a person, that there will be an increased sentence and an increased penalty, because we know that it has a greater impact on those individuals. And I think as a country, as a society, we need to be very clear that it's not something that we're going to tolerate. So I firmly believe that this legislation needs to be enacted this evening. I absolutely believe that we need to come back to the hate speech element of it. Again, I'm stressing I made that decision, but I made it because I wanted to ensure that this element of the bill was enacted. But I do believe that we need to come together as an Oireachtas, as a Dáil, however many of us are back after the election, to make sure that we can update the 89 legislation. But let's send a very clear message to those who are vulnerable in our communities at the moment that we will not tolerate any form of violence or intimidation or crime against you simply because of who you are. That is what we're doing here this evening. That is all we're doing, deputies. We're sending a very clear message that if you target someone because of who they are, that you will face a stronger penalty. And I think we need to send that message out here this evening. Thank you.
Deputy McGrath, please.
I simply won't in elections from Sinn Féin, and for the record, I always opposed Section 31. It was a mad, probably at the very outset it might have been needed, but it kept going on and going on and going on and going on, and it was impossible. The problem we have now, the last number of years, until lately, until you were found out, Sinn Féin, I mean, is that we couldn't get you off the airwaves.
We check your voting record.
Please do. Couldn't get you off the record, or off the radio, television, media. They were the darlings of the media. But it was empty vessels and there was nothing behind it, and they've been found out now. Banana skins and, no policies, only just dictate from Belfast. And Minister and Deputy Howden, and I listen to you always and I respect your long service and your very well-taught words always, but certainly the 89 Act, and I wasn't here in 89 or a long time after, but the 89 Act is there, and yourself have expressed concerns that is not amalgamated into this new proposed legislation to stop confusion. And it will be confusing, and is confusing. And Minister, I didn't hear you saying anything, even though Deputy Howland was delighted with all the lovely words I said. The words are great. But people, our own people in Ireland, and I'm not anti-anybody, are failed their life in their homes, day in, day out. And if there's been a little more time concerning about them and having the rule of law and having a commissioner that the Gardaí can support, we might see some hope at the end of the line. But this is a vanity project, of course it is. While it's half-baked now because, and I commend the esteemed senators that throw it to shreds, because when we came in here at second stage, as Deputy Tobin said, there was no one to speak against it, only himself and myself. All the Sinn Féin deputies that day spoke glowingly how it was 10 years too late, how it was welcome. But now they got the backlash from the people. They've flip-flopped again. They had more flip-flops done than Ryan Tubridy had in RT for the show. Flip-flop all the way. They keep flip-flopping until they find out. But you're also neglecting people. And I put it to you earlier, and you didn't answer, you didn't even respond to it. There is nothing to stop somebody on a mission to destroy somebody's reputation from using artificial intelligence to clone a person's voice and to use it to create a 100% convincing audio file that would easily fall under the this proposed hate speech legislation, post it onto social media, have the person arrested, charged and convicted of hate speech crime, perhaps jailed, depending on what was said on the cloned audio file. And you ignored my request. These are not my concerns. These are not my, you didn't answer the question on this. In any shape, under current legislation, there are safeguards in place that would prevent this from happening. But under this proposed legislation, there is nothing to safeguard a person's reputation and liberty if they fall victim to such a cloning scam. And that's very, very possible, as you know. So how would you possibly prove in court of law that you didn't make these hate speech statements when it's, with AI you can do that? Of course you can do that. Will the absence of any trace of audio file on your phone, laptop or computer be enough to convince a judge that you didn't utter these hate speech statements? And this legislation is leaving wide open for that to happen. As perhaps rushing this bill through the House at breakneck speed ahead of an election without an opportunity to tease out its consequences may well have the dire consequences down the road that could result in innocent people convicted of crimes they did not commit. And that's my worry, and it's a very real worry. So as I said, to quote you again from your earlier speech where you said it's a duty of governments to ensure that people were protected from crime. Every hour of every day. You know, people are afraid. I just got two WhatsApps since it was established this bill about a strange van circulating in my own parish at the moment. People are terrified. And there's not tonight in my area, from Ireland to Borlahan, and from Clonmel, Feather to or Carrick-on-Suir, the whole vast castle. There mightn't be 2 guards on duty. It's disgraceful that you would treat the Gardaí like that, first of all, putting their lives in danger. But it's more bigger disgrace that there's nobody to protect the citizens. And we're all here, then we want to be the lovely, welcoming place for everybody. But we can't protect our own citizens, not alone the citizens coming in. And then when you have situations like the siege of Dundrum in Tipperary, where Minister Gorman, the superintendent that was there that morning, gave instructions that it came down from the Minister of Justice and Minister for Integration that these busloads were to be pushed in here. Peaceful people. Many members of your own party were there, Minister. Decent people that didn't lift a finger to anyone. And there was plenty of intelligence on the guards to know there wasn't going to be any trouble in Dundrum. An excellent place, excellent people. And he brought a force of 200 Gardaí, including the dog squad, into a peaceful village to force a busload of people in. And when it turned out that one of the unfortunate ladies was 39 weeks pregnant, that was whisked out of a place here in Dublin and brought down there with no records, no scans from hospitals, and the people that were at the gates, Andrea Coe for one, and others, and my own daughter were pushed and got her back to Dublin and organised Gianna Care and others to look after the woman. And that's what I'd expect from the people of Dundrum. And they wanted to look after those people, but G abused them by moving around the country with short notice. They had children in school here, and they had uniforms bought from everything else. Unfortunate people treated like cattle. They had 12 hours notice they were going, weren't told where they were going. Is that the way the modern Ireland you're talking about? And that kind of a force of Gardaí, contempt for the people of Tipperary, who support the Gardaí day in, day out. At that same time, there was a robbery in the village of Cullen, a rural area, and they had to wait 3 hours for a Garda. And there was 200 of them around. Vans, paddy wagons, tow trucks, massive operation that cost over €30,000 that day. But nobody find money for that. A show of strength for you when you're commissioner, and they won't support the Gardaí. As I said earlier, and repeated that 98.9% of the 98.9% have no faith in the Garda Commissioner. And you chose to side with the Commissioner rather than the Gardaí.
It's, again, I'm very reluctant to interfere with any member, but it's not fair to make criticisms of the Commissioner who's not here to defend himself.
I'm just I accept that.
I know what you're quoting. I know what you're quoting. But the truth is, you would be a fair person, I believe, and you shouldn't make charges that the man is not here to defend himself against.
Well, I did attend the meeting with the man, and he wouldn't answer my questions some years ago. So he has plenty of time to do that and plenty of spin, and he walked down the main thoroughfare of our city, flanked by several other Gardaí, for a show of contempt for the people, actually, because they know themselves people are terrified. So it's not my words, it's the fact of his own members. Almost 99% of them have no faith in him. What in God's name is wrong? These are the people that defend us here every day and mind us and all over the country. But as I said tonight, to go back, and your county's the same, although the last recruitment drive from Timbermore, you got 9 of them, I think, your own constituency. We didn't get any to Tipperary. Not one. Carrick-on-Suir town is the 14 Gardaí and 4 sergeants. We have now 3 Gardaí and 1 sergeant. The fear is in the people. And the roving gangs that are going around tonight, lamping and everything else and spotting and terrorising people. People are in fear in their homes. And we're here discussing a vanity project for yourself and your government, your colleague beside you. The Irish people are fair and respectful by and large. And as Deputy Howland pointed out, and we are. And where there's hate crimes, and the same Commissioner, Count Cola, has said more than once that he's enough legislation to deal with hate crime. He said that, and I can quote him. So what are we at here? In the dying days, when the curtains are coming down on top of this government, wakes us idea that they are, and allow the people, if we decide when it is or when it won't be, to allow them to vote, they will give a fairly convincing verdict on your behaviour. Laws for this and laws for that, and no support for the ordinary people. And what you did in Dundrum and Tipperary, and in Roscrea, and many other areas, was shocking. Shocking. And we have buildings there now without fire certification, and we have unfortunate people from all over the world that came here looking for protection inside those buildings which are unsafe, and we're told now there's an audit being done on safety. There was a fire set there 10 years ago. There was a bad fire in the place since. And this is what you do with people. So the double standards and the hypocrisy is astonishing. Astonishing. Simply astonishing. And the double standards from Sinn Féin is, but sure, look, we got used to that now. We're not one of them. Everyone has spoken the last time here on the second stage, spoke in favour of this bill. So many years too late, and glowing references. What changed since?